some good votes of thanks on the chat there. So, Mark, if you care to turn on your camera, and Catherine, and come and join me on the stage, and Adam as well. Hey, Catherine, how you doing?
Hello, doing good. How are you?
Really good. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. That was amazing.
She's good, isn't she? Really good. I just love the soporific voice as well. A bit like Mark's, actually.
Yeah.
What time of day is it for you, Catherine?
It is mid-morning, almost 10 o'clock a.m. Yeah.
Good. I've got the timing right, so I haven't had to get you up at sort of 5 a.m. like I did.
No, thank you.
Good. And Mark and Adam, be very welcome. Great to have you back on the virtual stage with us again.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we're going to have a discussion about loss and about hope, two important things right now. And this was one of the most powerful panels we did in the previous G24, and I really wanted to repeat it and give you guys a bit more space and time to talk, as it was so powerful before. So thank you for agreeing to come and share your experiences and perspectives again. Mark, I'll get out of the way as normal and hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Rob, and thank you for everybody who's attending. We are honoured to be able to talk to you. Thank you for all the amazing work that you've done. And over the next, I think, 50 minutes, we're going to kind of share our story one by one, and then we will basically have a bit of a chat and a conversation about what we've experienced and where it might be useful for others. It was great that Adam and Catherine were involved last time. We also had Lou involved, who unfortunately has had a family circumstance that she has to deal with, so she won't be able to join us this time. But I'm really looking forward to hearing both Adam and Catherine again, and then contributing in my way to this story. Adam, we decided the last time that we would go in alphabetical first name order. So why break with precedent? And let's give the stage over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for listening. So I'm Adam Land. Well, last time I checked, I was a senior civil servant, but you can't be too careful these days, so I'll check again tomorrow morning. But I'm a senior civil servant at the Competition Markets Authority, and we basically look after consumers' interests. And we've been busy during the pandemic on some things, for example, people ramping up the price of hand sanitizers and so on. So we've been busy in pandemic, but not key workers in any sense. I'm going to talk a bit about a very severe loss that I and my family suffered 2 years ago, which was the loss of my daughter Eloise. Just describe that really, and then I'm going to talk a bit about sort of what helped me get through that, I guess, and a couple of things that helped me after that loss, and then I'll talk a bit about how at my work at the CMA we've been, I suppose, how that's shaped the way I've reacted as a manager and a leader at my work in the last few months in response to COVID-19, really. So that's what I'm going to do. So it starts very sad and hopefully gets a bit less sad as we go through the process. So I'm going to tell you about my experience of loss. So I've got 3 children, Kirsty, Eloise, and Francis, and a very happy family until around 2015, where Eloise started to lose weight and become remote from the family, I guess I'd describe it, and developed anorexia and eventually developed a complex set of mental health difficulties that required her to be in various hospitals, mental health facilities, adolescent mental health facilities for most of the following 2 years. They weren't all black those times. She was in and out of hospital, and we shared a lot of love with her over that period, and had some good times and some laughs as well as her trying to recover. But very sadly, in April 2018, on home leave, she took her own life. So I mean, that's the core of my story and of my loss, really. So I won't try and describe how that felt, but you can imagine how it felt, really. It's a devastating experience to lose someone, and to especially having fought, her having fought and us having fought as her parents to try and avoid that outcome, really. So that's my loss really, and the pain that we suffered. In terms of how we've sort of, as a family, and how I personally sort of came to recover, when I reflected on this, when we were asked to give these talks, I sort of boiled it down to there really being sort of two things that I found were incredibly helpful in the process of coming to terms with losing Eloise. So the first was actually a conscious choice on my part and from our family to be open. So being open about what had happened, and it felt like that was the right thing. So sort of when she died, I think particularly she'd been in hospital, and a lot of her friends were people who'd been in hospital with her and were struggling. It was very clear, and I guess it's not always clear, I think, when someone dies, that we weren't the only people who'd lost her, that she had all sorts of other people who loved, and that we needed to share our loss and our grief with those people. And so there's obviously a couple of days immediately afterwards which are a blur, but then after that I think we felt, well, we need to find a way of involving those other people in having lost Eloise. And I think this being the sort of digital age, I think we sort of communicated it through Facebook. We set up a much loved tribute site. We set up a Spotify playlist so that sort of other people could find out about what a wonderful person Eloise had been, really, and be part of remembering her really with us. So that was sort of the immediate response. And again, we had a large, slightly eccentric sort of memorial service for her as well, which we tried to get anyone who wanted to come was welcome to come with it. And similarly at work, actually, when I came back to work, or when I told work, I was very keen actually not to have to tell every individual person at work one by one of this terrible thing that had happened to me, or for people not to know and to suddenly find out and then to be shocked and have to deal with that. So when I told my immediate colleagues, my boss, our chief executive and so on, I said, look, would you please tell other people as well? I don't want this to be a sort of a secret or something that hasn't happened. I want this to be something that people know about and can talk about, really. And I was also very keen to be open about the when, which Eloise had died in the circumstances. I didn't feel I wanted her to be remembered, and I didn't want people to feel that the fact that she'd died by suicide was something that should prevent people from talking about her or remembering her. So I think we were very upfront about that at work, and also in the sort of memorial service. So that's what we did, and kind of why we chose to be open. I'm really, really glad that we made that decision, and I respect other people who take a different route through it. But I suppose when I think about the benefits, just for me, selfishly about it, is I suppose firstly, I feel I can talk about Eloise whenever I want to. So quite often, if I'm talking about my kids, I'll talk about Eloise, I'll talk about Kirsty, I'll talk about Francis. They're all part of my life, and I'm able to talk about it, and I don't feel a taboo, because I don't have to say, oh yes, by the way, my daughter's died, and then say something about her, really. So that's really important to me. I think it also puts other people, I'm thinking in the workplace really, but at ease at sort of being able to talk to me about it as well. That's quite important for me as a senior person at work, that people don't feel they have to tiptoe around me, and that this is a sort of topic that we can talk about. And then I think the third thing that's really important, I think, by being sort of upfront and open about this really bad experience, is that it lets other people sort of show kindness to me. And there's all sorts of ways, I suppose, both from sort of friends in the immediate aftermath and colleagues and so on, taken time to have a chat or sent us some flowers. Or I was remembering, because it was 2 years ago today, we went on a big walk for everyone at my work. We went on a walk between what's now our new office and our old office, remember Eloise, and also the wife of a friend and colleague who'd passed away as well. And that was a wonderful thing. So actually, we got so much by letting people sort of share a loss and being upfront about it. So that's the first thing that helped me. And then the second thing that sort of I found really helpful over that period, I'm still finding helpful really, is about learning from other people's experiences. I think everyone loses people who they love, really. That's what happens, because we're all mortal, and we all love people. So it's not, I'm not the first person to lose someone I love by any means, really. So again, and there was a lot that people were generous with their own experiences with me. So if I think about friends and family, I think my dad, in a very sort of dad type way, wrote me a letter. I had lost my sister also died young by suicide, so he'd been through exactly what I'd been through, and he'd sort of wrote me a nice letter about that. Friends who'd lost others in similar, another friend at work lost her brother when she was younger. She told me something about her experience when she was younger, and she'd sometimes pop into her dreams, and she told me to watch out, to tell that to my kids, as if it happened to them. And she said, over time it started to feel nice. It was good to see him again, she said, and that's certainly happened to me since. And it is, if I wake up and I've had a dream about Eloise, I'll turn to my wife and say, oh, Eloise came, and we had a little chat about it. So it changed the way we would feel about a sort of potentially traumatic experience. And then we've also sort of, there are books, there's the Griefcast podcast, which is fantastic. There are lots of a lot of people everyone's experienced loss, and there are records, films, all sorts. So just drawing on that human experience of loss and losing people has been really helpful. And I think from other people's experience, I suppose it's helped me get a perspective on my experience, make sense of it, and also really feel that it's not just about me. This is something that happens to everyone, really. So I think those two things, openness and learning from other people's, has really helped. And then I suppose briefly, I'll just say, bring this up to the current stage, and I'll just sort of say how that's kind of affected my approach to the last couple of months, really, which is, I suppose, very early on, as we were starting to go into the lockdown, I'd see people like Rob or others on social media sort of flagging to say, well, look, this isn't just a physical health crisis. There's clearly going to be an impact on mental health, and that's a really important thing. And I think because I'm, for obvious reasons, focused on mental health and talk about mental health at work quite a bit, I thought, well, it's quite important to try at my office to try and create some sort of space for people to share their own experiences and to acknowledge it as much as anything. So I started writing a few blogs about sort of how I was experiencing the sort of initial phases of coronavirus. And my experience has been fairly mild, really. So my dad's got an underlying health condition, so a bit anxious about him, and it's all a bit weird, and I don't like having my routine right. And so I wrote some fairly mundane, in some ways, blogs of just about how I was feeling, but sort of from the heart and sharing how it was. And I did it, and people liked them, and did a couple more, and the chief executive sort of referred to them in his own communications, and he started talking a bit about his own sort of personal experience. And then gradually, and this was really wonderful, I think, at work, was that sort of colleagues started to feel comfortable about sort of sharing their own experiences of what it's been like over the last 3 months, whether that's in blogs or meetings or conversations. And we've had a really sort of, everyone else's story is much more interesting than mine in terms of the coronavirus experience. We've had a really sort of rich set of sort of people sharing what it's like to have had coronaviruses. Someone wrote about health anxiety. Someone talked about alcohol during this period and trying to stay sober during the period. Other people live with key workers and what it's been like at the peak, worrying about people going out and coming back every day. So really sort of once people start feeling comfortable, we've got a really amazing sort of conversation going within our workplace. I think that you can see shows the sort of differences and similarities between what people have been experiencing, and I think has helped colleagues, including me, to stay on the right side generally over the last few months, really. And it's been nice over the last couple of weeks to see that sort of openness starting to spread to things away from the virus. Obviously, we've had George Floyd death, that we had a good conversations about that, and similarly the last couple of weeks about Pride as well, and people talking about their experience of coming out. So obviously this has been a terrible 3 months in very many ways, but one positive thing to come out of it, I think, at our work has been actually that we have developed a slightly more open culture, actually, in terms of talking about some of our experience, and developed a richer set of relationships. So that's really my story, and my story so far, I guess, or on there. And I guess just reflecting on it, and reflecting on when we were talking last time, I guess it's part of being a human being that something bad is going to happen to all of us at some point in our lives, really. And it takes time, and it takes having the opportunity to sort of reflect, to come to terms with loss of any sort, really. But there's also hope. And I guess what I'm trying to say from this is that by sharing our stories and our experiences, we can help ourselves and each other to accept our past and move forward into the future.
Thanks so much. Again, it's having heard that a few weeks ago and your story and it's about your daughter. It's incredibly moving then, but actually hearing it for a second time, it's a very powerful story about her, but also about you. And it kind of sets us up well for the conversation that we want to have. Can I turn to Catherine now? And Catherine, if you'd want to tell your story, that would be great.
Sure, yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And Adam, thanks for sharing again. Yeah, it's really touching. I'm so sorry about your loss. And really reminds me too about, I do a lot of global work in mental health and just how much kids are struggling all over the world and how they have been for quite some time, more so than when I was a kid. And it's getting worse now with the pandemic and everything that's going on. So it's so important to talk about it and to talk about what's happening with youth and how to cope with it. So just to get a little bit into my story, when I was 19, lost my own dad to suicide. He died by suicide. And yeah, it was devastating. He was a banker, he was in finance, he was a hero to me, really involved in the community and had really untreated mental health challenges for quite some time. And this was maybe, let's see, it's been maybe a little over 30 years now. So, we weren't talking about it at all at that time. So I have two older brothers and I was a freshman in college, ended up leaving college, really close to my mom. And then went on my own, journey and attempted myself in my 20s, and which was shocking to me because I saw the impact of losing my dad and what that did to his friends and me and family. And so I've come to realize how high of risk I am for suicide, for that genetics. Anytime we go through major life events, we're at challenging events, and definitely the coronavirus is something that's changing people's lives pretty dramatically right now. So it's really, really important that we pay attention to our mental health. But I was fortunate. I got treatment on and off. And when I was starting a company, a brand, like a social impact brand, and wanted to donate to a nonprofit for mental health, and started looking in the mental health space. This was 16 years ago, and saw a real branding issue with mental health. And the research suggested less than 25% of people were getting treatment, and depression and anxiety are very treatable. And to me, this seemed like more of a branding issue than anything. They said stigma was the primary reason, and stigma is really kind of lack of understanding and misperception. And I felt positive because I thought, my expertise is in branding, and I thought, okay, well, that's something we can change. So I ended up creating my own nonprofit at the time, kind of in honor of my dad, and with the mission to work to rebrand mental health. And that was primarily by talking to other organizations about what a brand is and how other disease states have eradicated stigma through celebrity engagement, getting leaders like Adam involved and talking about their own mental health and challenges, talking about more of the biology of the brain and body and how that's connected, using universal symbolism. And so I did well with the product line, and about 6 or 7 years ago, we got some money for the nonprofit. And because I am at such a high risk for suicide, I did get sober 15 years ago and work really hard on my lifestyle and habits and nutrition and regulating emotions. But the nonprofit I got really serious about looking at, okay, if we want to prevent suicide, how might we go about doing that? Like really prevent it, not intervene at a time when we're kind of at crisis, but more from a, way before then. And so looking at the research, hopelessness is the single predictor of suicide consistent. And you can be hopeless about something specific in your life or your life in general, or maybe it's your finances, or right now, maybe it's your health, but it's hopelessness. And hopelessness in the literature is defined as a feeling of despair and a sense of helplessness. So you feel really horrible and you feel like you can't do anything about it. And so we created a program to actually teach the skills of hope. So how we get from feelings of despair to feeling better, and then how we take smart action through goal setting. So we're teaching it around the world with kids, and I'm now really starting to teach it in the workplace. How to create, maintain, and sustain hope, because that for me personally hope is a known protective factor against anxiety, depression, and suicide, but for me personally, it's my protective factor against my own suicide, So, we've gotten really, really serious about that personally. And then my company is called the Mood Factory, and it's all about presence. And I do a lot of the hope work through that. So, we need, hope is not a wish. So, and when you see people talk about hope in the media, part of my mission now is to kind of rebrand the work hope, but hope is measurable and you can increase it. And the more we can do that and use kind of our hope skills, the more we can prevent the tragedy of suicides moving forward. And I'm really passionate about that. And our kids, again, before even the BBC did a documentary of our work in Northern Ireland, the kids before now have been struggling really hard, and I'm experiencing it with my nieces here in Oregon. They are, being taken out of school, being away from their friends, being around adults that are in a state of fear, and that is really stressful on the body and self. So we definitely, we need to prioritize mental health now more than ever. So grateful to be here.
And again, like Adam, thank you very much for sharing kind of your story. I think the power of stories is really important, and also it's the power of telling stories, hearing, as opposed to the PowerPoint display on, these are the things you should do, which is all very important, but actually it's that underlying nature of human experience that can resonate with people so much. And I think Adam and Catherine have done a lovely job of kind of telling their story and making it so relatable. My story is kind of similar but different. And one thing I learned from doing this a few weeks ago, I don't talk about it very much. And I watched the video. I don't usually watch, well, we don't normally, if this was a real conference in terms of we're all physically together, because obviously that was the definition of real for such a long time, you don't get to see yourself afterwards. So when Rob sent through the link, I watched myself and I realized I went on and on and on. And I kind of really did the very, very long version. And I felt like afterwards going over writing a little letter to everybody apologizing, because I realized that there's part of telling your story to other people, but it's also part of telling your story yourself. Releases that. And I hadn't actually really told my story for a long time. And as a result, the kind of floodgates kind of went. I'm going to try and do better this time. I'm going to try and give you the 12-inch rather than the full album version to show my age. I moved to America in 2000 with my job. I had a very grand title of the president of the New York Institute of Finance. It wasn't really that grand a job, but what it did was it gave me a corner office in the World Trade Center on the 17th floor of Tower 2. I moved out of the corner office very quickly. I moved into open plan, but it was the symbolism. It was all very exciting about being in the World Trade Center. It was an amazing building. And it was kind of iconic thing of being, it was iconic to Americans, but it was also iconic to being Brits. We were in a meeting on September the 11th, and one of my colleagues came running in to say that there'd been an explosion in the other tower. We didn't know what it was at that point. We evacuated. as the boss, I was the last person out. That was something that was quite scary for me. I don't really consider myself to be somebody who's particularly physically brave, but I also am somebody who probably takes on responsibility. So therefore, there's a big conflict with me with that. To cut the story short, in a way, we got everybody out of the building just before the plane went into our building. And my team, we all scattered. Quite a few eventually regrouped at my house, my flat that I had in New York, because I lived quite close to downtown. A lot of people lived over in New Jersey. We spent the day and part of the next day trying to make sure that we had everybody. We had assumed everybody had got out, but because a lot of the cell phone and the mobile phone infrastructure in New York was either overwhelmed or down, there were people we couldn't get in touch with until that kind of next day. And luckily, I mean, hugely luckily, we had got everybody out. Nobody had gone back in. Nobody had waited. And everybody was safe. But they weren't safe in the normal sense of the word. They were physically safe, but they were very traumatized. One of the things that I find you do is you put yourself to responsible to them when you're the boss, and for the next few weeks and the next few months, you kind of prioritize the well-being of your staff. And I think we were owned by Pearson. Pearson was a truly amazing organization in terms of the support they gave us, and so we were able to kind of regroup. We got office space in Midtown, but it was really clear very early on that people were very traumatized. Actually, there were kind of various distinctions between people who lived on Manhattan, and then a lot of my staff lived over in New Jersey, and a lot of the team lived over and used to get the tube, the path, as it was called, under the river. That would be destroyed, so people were now getting buses through, and they were going through in tunnels, and they'd arrive and work absolute nervous wrecks because they were trapped, and there was a real claustrophobia and a real worry around that. But you kind of, I went into kind of sort mode, fix mode. It's something I'm probably fairly predisposed to do. And then I kind of suffered another fairly major blow, which was about 3 weeks later. My father died. He had motor neurons disease, and it had got considerably worse. After about 2 weeks after 9/11, I went back to Britain to see my parents. I then came back, and the day after I came back, my dad died, and I had to go back to the UK. And that was when my own kind of resilience collapsed. I just remember, I don't think I said this last time. I was getting on the British Airways plane to Manchester from New York that night. And friends from the office had driven me out, and my PA had packed the dark suit and everything, and I was just a wreck. And the security had gone through the roof, obviously, after 9/11, and the amount of times they checked your passport and checked your pass and everything. And I eventually got to the door of the plane, and I got asked again for my ticket. Now, obviously, I'd had it because I'd been checked about a dozen times by this point, but I couldn't find it. And the stewardess was just sort of said, "Can I have your ticket and passport?" And I'm like, go into panic mode, and I just started to sob. And obviously, I think she thought it was a little bit of an overreaction to not finding my ticket. And I just said, "Look, my dad's just died, and I'm kind of going home." And she said, "Look, don't worry about the ticket. Here you are. Sit you down." And she came and actually sat with me all evening. The plane was quite empty, and I couldn't sleep. And she was just truly, truly lovely. She was so supportive, as I just kind of said what had happened in my 3 weeks before this. And what was fascinating for me over the course of the next week and a bit, as well, I was home. I'm an only child, so I was supporting my mum quite a lot, and I was just getting email and cards from colleagues around the world, just being terribly supportive. Went back to New York, and worked over the next year rebuilding the business. didn't sleep very well, and eventually went to my local equivalent of a GP, and sort of said, look, I need something to sleep better. I'm really not sleeping. The GP sort of said, well, what's been going on? And I went, oh, it's very matter of fact. I was World Trade Center, Dad died. It's going to be fine. Just give me sleeping tablets and I'll be fine. I'm not going to misuse them. I'm not that person. And obviously there was concern there on his, and he sort of said, have you seen somebody? And I go, I felt like saying at this point, I was kind of, I hope Catherine smiles at this, is no, you don't understand, I'm British. We don't talk about this. This is 20 years ago. We're pretty rubbish now being British about this stuff. We've got a hell of a lot better than we were then. He sort of said, no, I'm not going to. I think here's some recommendations of some people I think that you'd be able to talk to. So I went kind of kicking and screaming, and it was hugely helpful. Over the course of the next 5-6 years, though, I developed PTSD. I came very much in the form of getting in cars and particularly getting on planes, which was a real problem because I was on a plane virtually every other week. And I had hypervigilance around travel, and it was getting worse and worse and worse. And it was eventually, when I was on holiday, our family was on holiday with my best friend and her family, she took me aside and said, right, because I had decided not to go around on one of the day trips because it was just frazzling my brain. It was Sicily. There were mountains with big drops and everything, and her husband was quite an adventurous driver. So I have my reasoning behind it, but it was obviously a little bit out of control. And she gave me a big sit down. She's one of the few people I actually will take being sat down by. And so when I came back, I started having EMDR therapy, and it did help a lot. So that was kind of my story around all of this. But what I've seen over the last 5 years, the reason I got to know Rob is we at college. I'm principal at City Lit, which is the biggest adult college in Britain. We have a thing which I kind of helped found called the Mental Wealth Festival, which is the idea of talking more and more about mental health, both in using the word wealth rather than just mental health, because the idea you can be poor at various times of your life, or you can be very rich, you can have abundance. And Baroness Hollins, who came up with the idea, had talked about, not just thinking about mental health as a deficit model, but also know it's a bit like your bank balance. It can be well, and it can be really not well at any particular time. And how do you cope with that? And how do you find mechanisms to smooth those things out? This last 5 years has been great. We've had people like Ruby Wax, we've had Alistair Campbell, and then we've had a lot of other events that have been very, very moving on a much more micro level. So we've had the big name speakers, and we've had the mindfulness class, just similar to the one that we just had before this session, which is hugely powerful. We've done partnerships with the National Gallery where people go and look at paintings and get guided through paintings to kind of lower their stress and their pressure. So it's a journey. I think, I reflect on what both of you have said around the virus and the pandemic. And one of the first things I said to my team was, there's the now. And it's not like September 11th, where the now was essentially a day. So it was very containable. The thing that I learned then was the now really led to a year of the trauma that people had afterwards. And I said, look, there's this immediate turning the lights off, grabbing your laptops, trying to get courses online, doing all of those things. But this is going to be an incredibly long slog. And both of you, I think, have talked really eloquently about that. The marathon nature of this crisis. So some people started very badly and have recovered. Some people actually started really well and like, yeah, we'll do this and go into action. And then by week 6 or week 7, really start to run out of steam. And I kind of, like I'm sure we all do, follow quite a lot of people who are interested in the area of mental health. And it's fascinating on Twitter and in LinkedIn, kind of comments and ebbs and flows. About 3 weeks ago, which I think was when people started lockdown, was suddenly everybody I knew, and I thought it was just my team and me, but everybody was having a really tough time. And we kind of talked about it quite a lot in the team, and we've got a bit better about talking about things. And one of it was well, the weather's changed. It was all very sunny for quite a while, and we're British, so we obviously respond to the weather in a way we do. But also, we're suddenly starting to go out of lockdown into some, we don't quite know what it is phase of, we wait for announcements. Are the pubs opening? Are the gyms opening? Is Leicester opening? It's there's huge amounts of uncertainty in terms of what's going on. And almost in a sense is the more constricting was quite scary. It was quite not manageable, but it was, you knew what the rules were. Suddenly when ambiguity was introduced, I think people suddenly started getting quite nervous about it, and you could see people's anxieties and my own anxiety levels going on. Oh, well, what does this mean? What do I have to do? And suddenly there were a lot more choices, and with choices was danger, obligation. So I think, just to finish my little bit is that, and hopefully I've been a little bit more succinct than last time. I think that sharing stories, and I've started, and I really didn't honestly do it first time around. After 9/11, I kind of dealt with my process on my own. I think I was a good boss and very supportive of my team. So when I saw people in distress, we pressed every button. We had health support people to support people, etc., etc. Where I failed, and I think I did fail at that point, was I went to that classic archetype of, well, I'll look after you. I will be dad. I am responsible. This time, I'm trying to be more, it's a bit shit, isn't it? Today's not great, or I'm having a bit, it's not brilliant. And I think because of that, you give permission for people to talk a lot more than they would do otherwise. And I think permission is a hugely important part of this, of which I'm now very conscious that I'm now going to ask both of you to kind of unmute, and ask you to reflect on giving yourself permission, but also giving other people permission by being a role model, and what your thoughts are around that, because you both kind of touched on that about how other people respond.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's awkward, isn't it? Shall I start?
Okay, go for it, Adam.
Yeah, so I guess I initially I'm just as British as you, Mark. So I initially had exactly I can't imagine that I was going to be someone who talked about things like I've just talked about, really, when I was even 10 years ago, really. And I think I first started talking about the sort of mental health issues when Eloise was in hospital. I actually started talking about them in family therapy for her, basically, as much as anything, to talk, because I've had my own mental health issues. So just to talk a bit about sort of what it's been like for me to sort of share that sort of she wasn't in this sort of unique position, and then kind of having, I think the process of articulating what you've been through is really helpful just in itself. And having done that, I think we were starting to think about what various things at work include to do with sort of diversity and health and well-being and so on. And so I think with a colleague who was setting up sort of our sort of diversity program at work, and I'm rubbish at all diversity. And I'm a straight white cis male, etc. So we went to Oxbridge, so I'm terrible on all diversity factors, but we all had to have a diversity objective, and we all like to achieve things. So I suppose down our head. So yeah, you're talking about that. So that's sort of how I ended up doing that combination and did that. And yeah, it felt fantastic. It's the first thing to have talked about my own experience, I think I felt, gosh, that was liberating, because kind of people knew that I'd had mental health difficulties, but they were sort of people, very close friends who I worked with, who knew, but it wasn't something that had been sort of upfront about. And so it felt sort of liberating like that. But then really, yeah, you felt the response of people who I don't think had heard someone talking about their mental health at work in terms, really, I think, or, you know, and you could, you know, I think a lot of people actually on that occasion kind of put their hands up and said, oh yeah, I've had this issue and this experience or whatever. And so that, you know, it was something completely new to me, the sense that you could say something and people would react quite so sort of immediately to it. And so I suppose that's really an example of what you're talking about. And then I think the other thing that you have to sort of develop over time is really that people actually believe that your organization is sincere and earnest and isn't just sort of, well, let's all have a chat about mental health and then kind of do nothing about it, or then kind of, I think people were nervous that if they were more open about their own experiences, that people would be very supportive on the day, but then would say, oh, I'm not sure they'd be right for this tough assignment, or that sort of thing. So I think you have to back up. I think that's for two things. You have to make sure that you're not exposing people and putting them into a very vulnerable situation by sort of asking them to be incredibly open about themselves when they're not really ready to share. So I suppose that's one thing. And then the other thing is people have got to believe that your sort of organizational culture is one where people won't be penalized for being open and will in fact be, you know, it's a positive thing. You'll be supported because people recognize that that's the thing. So I think it was important that, I mean, I'm not the head of my organization, but I'm sort of moderately senior, and I think it was important and sort of necessary that sort of people towards the top of the organization are among the first who come out and talk about their experiences, because I think it then makes it, people can see that nothing's happening to you, and that makes people feel safe about sharing their own experiences at different levels, really.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important, is creating that safe space. Catherine, have you got any observations around?
Great. I mean, safety is key. I mean, it's one of our most basic needs. So feeling a sense of safety. And when leaders talk about, and every leader has stress at some level or anxiety, it doesn't have to be a super traumatic experience with mental health or a super deep depression, or, you know, every leader has anxiety or stress, and they are, you know, them sharing how they manage it and being supportive and encouraging others to do that makes such, I mean, that's so important and so key to stigma. And that's why, like, celebrities talking about it is really helpful, because if these people place celebrities on pedestals and you think a celebrity can deal with this, someone that has everything, then, you know, maybe it's not so abnormal. So I think that's really key. I mean, we're all right now, a lot of people are in a fight or flight. You know, Mark, when you were talking about it, it's like you're in that super stress response. And the research around hope is our ability to navigate change. So when we come into obstacles, when we're heading to a goal, it's our ability to feel good, and then our ability to kind of navigate change when we come into obstacles. And that's what kind of dictates how hopeful we will stay. And then if we need to, our ability to set new goals. And when we're in a state of fight or flight, we're going at a super high rate and not really present and feeling our feelings. And that's why a crash is so normal, because when we're finally forced to kind of feel what's been going on, it's overwhelming. And so learning how to regulate emotions and get out of kind of the fight or flight state. We teach our kids, like, you can't be in a hopeful place and an angry place at the same time. So the first thing you have to do is understand how you're feeling and listen to those feelings. And instead of acting out when you're in a place of rage or pain or sadness, you know, feeling them, listen to what they're telling you, and then get back into your, you know, your prefrontal, you know, lobe, and get more creative into that problem solving. You know, what can I do about it? How can I change things. So that was for me with my dad, I mean, tried my whole life to, make him happy and get him in a good mood. So in a way, I was kind of in a fight or flight state for a lot of my life. And when I finally lost him, it was so traumatic. And then, I was attached to having a father. And if you're attached to that, like I want a dad and he's not here, that just leads down a road of hopelessness. And so, it became important to me to think, okay, I want the feelings of what a strong father kind of person in my life brings. And how can I meet that need for myself and find other father-like figures? And so I focused more on that, and that really shifted things for me. But I think we're all kind of having to do that in one way or another, really, during this time.
I think one of the things, and that's really helpful, Catherine, in terms of I do talk a lot about the rhythm and cadence and how it changes over time, and sometimes it's more hopeful and sometimes it's less hopeful. I mean, I think the bit around this for me is that it's also not like you learn a language or a skill around mental health and well-being. It's an evolution that probably goes on for the whole of your life. So I think back to who I was 20 years, it's coming for 20 years ago now after September 11th. And I look back and go, well, I picked that box. That was all right. I did that well. But, that whole bit I was saying before about not really talking about myself, being there for others, but not actually being there for others by giving permission. Because some people will say, oh, you were so strong at that point. I was absolutely bloody wreck. But I felt that I couldn't say I was a wreck because it was just, that was not what was expected. And I think the role of leaders, and Adam, you touched on this just before, is, and I mean leaders within the organization doesn't happen to be the person at the top, although that often helps. But actually, I've seen it in a lot of organizations where people who are at relatively senior levels or lead a team or whatever, by being open, goes back to permission, gives permission for everybody else to be more open. And I really liked your piece, Adam, around your role in diversity, and actually being able to say, I hate the what I call the 1970s view of diversity, which is purely about gender, purely about race. Actually, it's about everybody's journey, and everybody has a very different journey. And actually, the thing a lot about mental well-being is you can hide it much more than you can hide other things. So you can put on a happy face, you can do this, and the fact that you're talking about saying, well, actually, look, this is my challenge around diversity. This is where I might tick all those boxes you think is this, but I'm also that as well. So for me, I think it's the role of that leader. Catherine, have you seen any good examples through organizations you've worked with of where you've been surprised about how a leader tackles or somebody senior tackles this and throws the organization into, whoa, didn't see that coming, and then it kind of, there's a big sigh of relief?
Yeah, I did a talk at Guggenheim Partners, and it was interesting. I was there sharing my story and about the work we do with the company and happiness and hope and whatnot. And right before I got on, it was live and it was throughout their company. The guy that had brought me on to talk about it got up and said, I've experienced depression before. And he's like, this is the first time I've ever talked about it, publicly. And he's really high up in the organization. And I thought, and it was kind of on the fly, and it was a risk for him. And he said, we all need to talk about it. And I could see the reaction. And I mean, he's leading to a lot of younger people, and it's a financial services company. So it's, and Guggenheim, the brand is really, they've got an amazing brand. And so, it was really inspiring, and it wasn't a planned thing, it was something that he thought, this is something we've all got to talk about. And so I was impressed at his willingness and I think bravery. I mean, I think it's brave for great leaders to talk about, especially too in finance, where I think it's I don't know. I mean, and maybe it's just because my dad was in finance and it just, you know, they didn't, which I find ironic because the return on investment for investing in mental health is so positive. There's such a high rate of return. I think, how is it possible that we aren't investing in this when, especially in the financial services, when we know that for every dollar invested, like it just makes sense.
And here he is, the man in pink.
Yay!
The man in pink.
Very, very. I thought actually that was Catherine. That was as if it was planned by magic, because Rob talks a lot about return on investment around mental health. How it's just one of the biggest levers that any organisation can increase performance by, and that was marvelous. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those cases that the moral case of investment, it's the right thing to do. The business case is there, and actually, the kind of social case is there now, because there is an assault on people's mental well-being as a result of the pandemic. So, you know, for me, it's a no-brainer, and those that are not leading on this agenda need to question, in my opinion, why they are leading at all in organisations, and that's a fairly bold thing to say. But what isn't a bold thing to say is you guys are amazing. And it was, as you say, Mark, incredible to hear all of your stories a second time around. They are really powerful stories. And I thank you so much for sharing them with our guests today and me again, because I think what they do is highlight the benefits of openness on your own recovery. And the benefits of connection with others around these issues, but they give us hope, Catherine, and it is hope we need right now to come through what we're going through. And thank you so much for your contribution in helping people do that.